It's a very difficult time for the people of Palestine, specifically the people of Gaza, who are facing a massive attack yet again from Israel. Attacks from air, attacks on land. And it's not just the people of Gaza and Palestine. We've also seen Israeli attacks taking place on Lebanon, on Syria. We've seen the United States attacking Yemen. And very serious issue, we've also heard talks about a war against Iran. A lot of issues around West Asia which could change the very nature of this world. We'll be discussing all this in this episode of Mapping Faultlines. Prabir, thank you so much for talking to us. So first of all, of course, Gaza, the attacks have been extraordinary. We're talking about 140,000 people displaced in, I think, in about 10 days or so. We know the details. Israel once again breaking the ceasefire. People have been predicting it for quite some time, using the flimsiest of excuses. They didn't clearly want to continue the ceasefire negotiations, which would have involved discussing when they would leave Gaza, and instead decide flimsy excuses and, of course, resume attacks. I think 700 people have been killed also since the ceasefire was broken. But of course, the humanitarian toll is getting worse by the day. But could you also maybe take us through what you see as Israel's aim specifically in this round of the attacks, especially now they've started the the attacks also, the ground attacks also?
So the issue is really not just an end game in Gaza, but what is the end game, for instance, in Syria? What's the end game in Libya? What's the end game in Iran, which is really what matters to both the United States and Israel. And of course, as we have seen with the ongoing attacks in Yemen, Yemen is very much a part of that. If you want to draw even a larger picture, then of course we get what's happening in Egypt. What are the repercussions of all these attacks on the larger West Asia that is on the cards? Because none of it is going to end without larger upheavals in the region. So, is the United States prepared for that? Are they just being led up the garden path, as many say, by Israel? I suspect it's not so simple. I think there is a convergence of views about the region which is driving all of this. And Trump, with all his claims about bringing peace in Palestine and so on, which he did initially, that was just as I had said at the time for the inauguration. It had really no larger aim in view, except by inauguration he should appear to have done something. After that, we have seen business as usual unfolding. And that's at the moment what you see in Gaza. Number of people killed, of course. Homeless, 80 to 85% of the people's homes have been demolished. Even that is now not available to people in terms of shelter and so on. And North Gaza, again, is the one which is under attack, that they are being asked to vacate. So we have really a dismal picture. But the important part in all of this, to my mind, is what's happening in the region. Because we do not see the kind of solidarity we would expect, except perhaps from Yemen, who are the only ones willing to take some risk and say, this is not acceptable. And of course, the West Bank is also under fire, as we know.
Right. So, of course, here the situation faced by an Oscar-winning director of a documentary, and the situation being replicated along the West Bank. I think a lot of attacks on refugee camps specifically. Also, the Israeli government increasing its pursuit of all those settlements. So we see, of course, on the one hand, a very brutal and extensive attack on the people of Gaza, and on the other hand, the continuation of the process of actually fragmenting the West Bank, destroying Palestinian inhabitations there, and increasing the number of settlers, which basically means that ethnic cleansing going on in different ways in both parts of Palestine as well.
Yeah, the interesting part of what is being changed in Israel is that the West Bank virtually has been handed over to the most extreme sections within the government. They are the ones who have been backed by the settlers, who in turn back the settlers. So now military has taken charge essentially of West Bank, and the settlements have been declared to be a part of really Israel and not a part of the West Bank, which still would be regarded as Palestinian. So separation of the settlements already is underway. And of course, rest is under occupation. Israeli settlers, as they're known, are extremely violent in the way they deal with the Palestinian population over there. And with the support of the military, this has become worse. This, in fact, is one of the places where they came, did stone throwing, attacked the Palestinian population, and then the police intervened to say this was a clash on both sides. And that's how the director that we are talking about was arrested, spent a day in jail because of the international reach of his film, the documentary, etc. He has now been released. But this, if he was any other Palestinian person in the West Bank, he would have probably spent a month in jail. And that is the scenario that is unfolding. How to remove the West Bank population, and who in the Arab world would be willing to participate in that is the question. At the same time, as we know, Syria and, of course, Lebanon is again under attack. And the kind of violence that is there in Syria is today backed by a regime which essentially is a whitewashed right-wing Islamist section, which is extremely violent towards all the minorities, including the Alawites, who are being slaughtered, massacred in not small numbers, shall we say. And this, I think, is also part of the larger picture of what we're seeing in the West Bank.
Right. Prabir, of course, now moving on, like you said, to Yemen, which is really a very connected issue, very closely linked to what is happening in Gaza for, of course, obvious reasons. One being the fact that Yemen is one of the few countries in that entire region which has, from the very beginning, from October 2023, expressed solidarity with Gaza, not just in terms of protests, of course, massive protests taking place, but also militarily targeting shipping going to Israel. We'll talk about shipping as well. But in return, the United States has decided to launch a full-fledged attack on Yemen, it looks like. And of course, there goes Trump's promise of not starting a new war. But I think scores of civilians are already being killed. The Yemenis people, of course, responding with massive protests. But also throws into, there's a big question here, which is really that how do you kind of understand these attacks on Yemen, and what is the impact considering how sensitive this entire region is, and the fact that this could escalate into a much bigger thing?
This is, I think, a very important question that you're raising. What is the larger geostrategic picture, and why, for instance, the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf so important? In fact, this is at the heart of it, the oil reserves of the world. But of course, United States under President Carter had declared this is the strategic reserves of the United States. So that is very much in the picture. So if you see the waterways, Persian Gulf, Iran has an influence. And also, it is not really linked to Israel and so on. If you come to Red Sea, then this is the path which leads essentially to the Suez Canal and therefore to the Mediterranean Sea. This is what connects the Arabian Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. Right. Now, that is why the strategic importance of Red Sea and also supplying to Israel, a lot of shipping that does take this path and reach Israel. So, Houthis in Yemen have targeted shipping which they believe ends up in Israel. But the net result of that is that a huge number of ships are forced to divert to what is called the Cape route, rounding off the Cape of Good Hope, and that's really adding about 8,000 to 10,000 kilometers to their journey, which has a cost. And that, of course, is a cost for various people. But the Houthis are the only one who have been willing to come in solidarity with the Palestinians and do what they have done earlier also, launch missiles on both the shipping and on Israel. The number of hits on Israel have been very few. But what they have been able to do is disrupt the shipping. Now, United States earlier attacked the Houthis. This is not the first time they're attacking Houthis. They have been continuously attacking the Houthis, particularly during when the Yemenis, the Houthis said they will not let the ships pass. So this is a continuation of that war. And in that attempt, United States was joined by also United Kingdom. But the navies of these two countries had very little impact on the Houthis. So the Houthis will take the pain, numbers will die, civilian population always really pays the price, but their attempt to stop the Houthis or topple the Houthis have not succeeded. This is also unlikely to succeed because in Yemen, they are seen to be one who's actually upholding the national identity. And those who have joined, for instance, with the Saudis, which is the south of Yemen, or with, for instance, United Arab Emirates, they don't have the legitimacy anymore. And Yemenis, Houthis, have won the fight with the Saudis, who finally agreed to a ceasefire with them. And they are now in the process of negotiating a settlement. So given that, Houthis have always been a very difficult nut to crack. I remember much earlier, Nasser had also sent troops to support the southern part of Yemen against the Houthis, and they had to withdraw after some time. So given this, there is very little chance that Houthis are going to back off. And unless the United States is willing to attack in a much bigger way, the Houthis are really not easy to stop. They've shown it earlier. And in fact, this is the discussion that happened also, in which the anger was not that what the United States was doing, Trump was doing, but that it got leaked. As you know, there is a secret discussion, a top secret discussion, which the various military and intelligence personnel were holding, surprisingly, on Signal. Now, that for us, a lot of other people, was very surprising. We thought they had the latest, telecom system by which they could hold secret discussions, top secret discussions, without needing what is a commonly available app which any of you can download on your system. So why this was being done is another issue. But the fact that a journalist who had no business being in such confabulations was also there, and who broke the story saying, I was by mistake attending these top secret discussions. That is what the Democrats have really been unhappy with. Not the bombing of Yemen, not the bombing of Sana'a. And by the way, for those who may not know, Sana'a is one of the oldest urban civilizations that we have. In fact, they had quote unquote what could be called skyscrapers, 10-story buildings, way back, 500, 700 years back. So this is really a civilization that has a lot in its past. That being bombed has not disturbed the Democrats, but they've been very upset, which is what Rashida Tlaib has said. They've been very upset that why was this discussion taking place on Signal, and why was a journalist called for it?
Right. So Prabir, coming back also to the point you mentioned, which is that really because of the issues over here, we've seen shipping having to take the long route. And of course, it costs shipping a lot of money, which is also what the Yemenis were aiming for. But I also want to bring you back to a much bigger escalation of this issue, which could happen with regard to Iran, which is if the United States and Israel really decide that they want to target Iran. Now, we've been hearing some very alarming news about the fact that at least sections in the US administration are very strongly pushing for a war on Iran. We know that a US carrier strike group is coming into this area, in addition to one that is already here, which is attacking Yemen. And we know that, there are, under the Trump administration, it's very difficult to say how much of this is a negotiation tactic and how much of this is, something that is actually being planned. So could you also take us through what real dangers are before not just West Asia, but the entire world right now in such a situation?
Well, interesting part of it is, of course, as it shows, how much extra shipping has to take place. And as it says, that adds another 11,800 nautical miles to the trip. And that obviously has a cost. cost of goods going from Europe or West Asia or North Africa to Asia, India and China, but also vice versa. So these are the two things. And of course, the oil route is the more important one because that adds a lot of cost, as you can see, by doing this round trip. Coming back to the question you raised, that what is the larger game plan with respect to Iran? Now, as we know, Israelis have always been interested in having the United States attack Iran. Now, Trump has now said to Iran they should have a serious discussion and come back to the nuclear agreement. Well, it's Trump who walked out of the agreement and not Iran. Iran was always willing to come back to the agreement, provided you come back to that agreement, which is de-link everything else from the nuclear agreement. That you can't say you don't do this, you don't support the Houthis, you don't support the Palestinians, you don't support other things, you don't do this, don't do that. That was not on the table. What was on the table is nuclear deal and nuclear deal alone. And Trump had walked out of it saying it's a bad nuclear deal. Now that Iran has not only gone ahead after the US walked out of it, they waited. They waited for a few years when none of the other countries were willing to say, okay, we will now accept your position and we are not with the United States, we'll continue trade and other relations. When they did not and continued with the sanctions which US had imposed, at that point of time, Iran has gone ahead with its nuclear plans. They have not produced the bomb because they said that's not something they will do, but they have also refined uranium, concentrated uranium to the extent they can actually do a bomb if they want to. They have enough now material with enriched uranium to a level where if they want, they can make the bomb. And that is something which is enabled by Trump pulling out of the nuclear deal and forcing the US forcing the international agency which is overseeing this also to essentially pull out of Iran, because Iran said, if you don't give us any sanctions relief, we don't really see why we should be in this deal. So that is the point which we had earlier. Now the response, it appears, is that basically the threat that Trump has held out, return to the deal or else. Now, if we take Trump's seriousness about the deal shown earlier, then or else seems to be the one that is really in play. And that, of course, has the support or the instigation or whatever we may call it of the Israelis, who see Iran as the major threat in the region. And therefore, if United States takes out Iran, then of course they would feel they can dominate the rest of West Asia. And the point is today, Israel by itself is not capable of taking out Iran. In fact, the bombing raids they had also showed the Iranian raider could detect the planes, incoming planes, at within a certain distance. And that meant that the missiles they fired had to be from a longer distance. And therefore, vis-a-vis Iran, they do not control the skies as they might have done, say, 10 years back. So given that you then have to really rely on American strength, because Israel doesn't have that kind of firepower to be able to take out Iran's essentially nuclear infrastructure, its missile infrastructure, and along with that, also a decapitating strike, which is what some of the conversations which have been leaked now seem to be. That is that what they are planning? If they are planning that, then we are really in for a West Asia, which is going to be partially destroyed due to this war, because Iran's retaliation, they have said, is going to be on the naval forces, essentially American forces in the area, but also its bases, which are in United Arab Emirates, which are in, for instance, I don't think Saudi Arabia is that much in the picture, but certainly UAE, Qatar, all these countries, also, I have already said UAE, sorry, United Arab Emirates,
Bahrain also.
Qatar, Bahrain. So a lot of other countries in the region, and let's not forget, there is Egypt and there is also Jordan. So all of these countries could come under attack. If Iran is attacked, in their retaliation, they might do. So I think this is the picture which, honestly speaking, we don't know which way it will go. Part of the reason is when you have individuals who take decisions, it's not possible to predict individuals. You've always argued that we cannot predict what an individual will do. We can predict larger picture, what countries can and should not do. But at these kind of points, it's very difficult to say what Mr. Trump is going to do and what he's not going to do. So yes, I think we are in difficult times. And also the larger picture is instabilities in a lot of these countries, which is cascading from the crisis in the region itself, starting with Palestine. And that is true for Egypt, that's true for Turkey, for example. So a lot of these collateral political situations, impacts are also taking place, which I think calls for caution if the United States was the responsible power. But we know that US has never been a responsible power. It believes it can remake the region. And if you remember the secret plans they had of which are the countries they're going to destabilize and really destroy their governments, a lot of them have been targeted and they have no governments today. And that includes, for instance, Libya, that includes Lebanon, that includes also the country Somalia. So all of these have been targeted. And of course, as we know, Iran was on the top of the list. So I think this is where we are. So at the moment, to predict what is going to happen is difficult. But it is also true that if Trump does what he's planning to do, take out Iran at the bidding of Israel, I think we are going to see far bigger dangers for the region and the world as a whole.
Of course, we're also one of the few rays of hope being the fact that there is a global solidarity movement, maybe not able to have the same impact that used to be the case maybe 40 or 50 years ago. But nonetheless, I think across the world, we're making a case very strongly for the people of Palestine, standing with the people of Palestine. This is, of course, a protest from Delhi a couple of days ago, but we've seen marches taking place both in the global north and the global south. So we hope that, good sense will prevail because of these kind of protests, and the scenarios you described won't come to pass. But thank you so much for talking to us. And that's all we have time for today. We'll be coming back with future episodes of Mapping Faultlines, where we will discuss not just issues such as Palestine, but also many other major developments. Important also to keep an eye on what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. There has been some kind of an agreement that these countries will stop attacking each other's energy infrastructure, that there will be some kind of pause on attacks in the sea if sanctions against Russia's trade in agriculture and fertilizers are withdrawn. Now, that's a very, very big if. Will the US follow through on it? That's the $1 million question. We'll keep a watch on that as well. Probably come back to discuss that next week. Until then, keep watching all our reporting on NewsClick.